Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Inshallah, we'll continue to read about the things that are permissible for somebody who is fasting. But before that, I had mentioned yesterday the point of distinction between what is considered as sunnah and what is considered as hadith. I just want to point your attention that for the people of hadith, people who are concerned with collecting hadith and authenticating them, all this is considered as hadith and all this is considered as sunnah, okay? This distinction of making a difference between the sunnah and hadith mostly applies to people of law, as to making the distinction between the hadith that is applied practically in life, or is it abrogated or so on, or is it weak, or is it something that is not commonly applied or rejected because it goes against another hadith or goes against another verse. So the distinction between sunnah and hadith mostly applies to when it comes to extracting laws and practical application in life. But if somebody is concerned just with collecting hadith, he will say all this is sunnah and all this is hadith. Just wanted to mention that so that nobody thinks that we are downplaying or downgrading the importance of the sunnah. No, it's very important that all this should be known. Even a hadith like the one we discussed yesterday, where nobody acted by it, although it is in Bukhari and Muslim, correct? And there's many other hadiths that you will find like that. You will find hadith, for instance, that talks about forbidding wearing dhahab al-muhallaq. I heard about this before, like bracelets and anything that basically bracelets. You'll find a hadith that says that this is like wearing a part of the fire, a ring of fire, but nobody actually considers this forbidden in Islam. But what do we do with a hadith like this? A hadith like this could sometimes be narrated because the person who narrated it did not understand the context where it was said. So scholars, for instance, say that Prophet ﷺ said this to a woman who was not giving out the zakah on this dhahab, for instance. You follow? So you will find a hadith like this. Could it be authentic? Yes, it can be authentic, but it doesn't mean that every hadith that is authentic has an application in life. Also, لا تشد الرحال إلا المساجد الثلاثة. That you لا اعتكاف إلا في المساجد الثلاثة. That you should not do i'tikaf, and i'tikaf is not valid except in the three masajid. Masjid al-Haram, Masjid al-Nabawi, and Masjid al-Aqsa. There's a hadith like this. Imam al-Albani said it's authentic. But is this what scholars go by? No. You can make i'tikaf in any masjid in the world. And the understanding would be that the best i'tikaf is in those three masajid. But if you look at the wording of the hadith, it says, La i'tikafa. There's no i'tikaf, which means it's not valid, it's not accepted, you shouldn't do it, you follow? So, that again, because people who narrate hadith not necessarily narrate it down to the letter and the word. There's a possibility that a person could have altered the wording a little bit, which makes a big difference. A person may say, Haram Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam such and such. He made it haram. But Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could have maybe the right wording was naha and hakum, which means that I ask you not to do something like this. He could ask you not to do something because it's makruh also, not necessarily haram. But the people who are receiving this information sometimes can use different wording, and you'll find some ahadith where a sahabi would say harama, another one would say naha, you follow? And but then you will find some other hadith showing that this matter is not totally haram. Then you would understand that the word nahi means it is only makruh. So basically, knowing the hadith and learning them and memorizing them is something very much encouraged in Islam. But when it comes to practical application, we have to look at what the scholars and experts of law, how they dealt with such a hadith, okay? And that's basically the point I was trying to make yesterday. So yesterday we mentioned that we stopped at, yes, to wake up in a state of janaba, to wake up, the woman hasn't done her shower after the menses. All this is acceptable and they can continue to fast. The next point they're talking about is al-iktihal. Iktihal. What's the translation of kuhl? Huh?
Eyeliner?
Yes, like, yeah, exactly, eyeliner, yes. It is eyeliner, but kuhl, they had a specific eyeliner that they used to put at the edges of the eyelids.
They call it tiro.
What do you call it?
Tiro.
Tiro?
Tiro? Yes.
What do you know the English name for it? Can you spell it? Can you spell the name for us?
Mascara?
No, mascara is in eyelashes. I'm talking about the kuhl, which goes like just almost into the eye, because the kuhl can actually go inside your eye. And sometimes if it goes inside the eye, the water, the tears, there's a duct, a channel that connects this to the nose, and the nose is connected to the throat. Sometimes if you put an eye drop, you can sometimes feel it in the back of your throat, the taste, right? Try translation of kuhl.
Ask him eyeliner.
Tiro?
C-O-H-L.
C-O-H-L. Kuhl. It's called kuhl, huh? Okay, kuhl. Has the name, but basically it's eyeliner. It's some form of eyeliner. It can have a taste sometimes. There's no hadith that talks about it this way or that way. Okay? But it is something that people used to do frequently, women and even men. And since we do not have a hadith that forbids or says anything about it, الأصل في الأشياء الإباحة. The default status of anything in life other than عبادات. العبادات الأصل فيها الحظر أو التوقيف. To do a ibadah, you cannot do a ibadah, it's a form or an act of worship, unless you have a specific prescription in the Shara. But daily life activities and muamalat and daily dealings and your whatever you do in your normal daily life, the default status is that it is permissible unless we have a hadith or a verse or a hadith that prohibits or restricts that. You follow?
The term is unless stated otherwise.
Unless stated otherwise, correct. In the hadith, in the Quran or Sunnah. So the circle of what is mubah is wide open, but the haram is only limited. The exception is basically the exception. You can eat all the foods except what is prohibited in Sharia, for instance, such as pork. You can drink all the drinks except if the Sharia specifies. If somebody is drinking something and if somebody claims that something is haram of what you normally use in your daily life, the burden of evidence is on them, not on the person who is actually doing that. You follow? And this applies to many things in life, and that's important because you will find sometimes certain opinions restricting lots of things that we do in our daily life, just out of somebody who came up with such an opinion, and there's no evidence to it. You'll find as we go in fiqh, you will find things like this, but the Sharia is much easier than what people think. So this is permissible, and this is the opinion of Imam al-Shafi'i wal-Hanafiya wa Ibn Hazm wa Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah. Even if it gets to even if you feel the taste in your throat, even if you feel. So this can also apply to eye drops as well. Eye drops, the same kind of thing, okay? Yesterday we talked about nasal drops, right? We talked about that no, you should avoid nasal drops. But eye drops is not a normal passage to the jawf, to your inside or to your stomach. The eyes are not a normal passage, the nose is. But that's why nasal drops we should avoid, we have to avoid actually. While eye drops we're allowed to do, and the kuhl we're allowed, eyeliner is fine. But you have to know that some scholars forbade that. Some scholars did forbid that. فذهب الإمام مالك وإمام أحمد إلى أن الصائم إذا اكتحل فوصل الكحل جوفه يفطر. Imam Malik said no, it's not permissible. If it reaches your throat, your fasting is annulled. It's not valid anymore. Just to know that, okay? And that is why the points he is discussing here are the points that can create confusion, or there's some opinion out there that said it's not permissible or it can break your fast. And the author, Tamim, she chose that opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Hazm, Shafi'iyya, Hanabila, that it is permissible because we do not have any text restricting this kind of practice. القبلة والمباشرة لمن قدر على ضبط نفسه. For somebody to kiss his wife, that is allowed as long as the person has good control and self-restraint. There's a hadith on this matter عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقبل بعض أزواجه وهو صائم. He used to kiss his wives while he is fasting. وعائشة also كان صلى الله عليه وسلم يقبل ويباشر وهو صائم. مباشرة means touching the skin. مباشرة. Called this بشرة skin. مباشرة means touching the skin. وكان أملككم لإربه. But he had the strongest, most perfect self-restraint. Okay? So let me read to you some of the opinions of the scholars on this matter. إذا قبل الصائم فلا يخلو المقبل من ثلاثة أحوال. قبل أو باشر. One of three conditions. أحدهما أن يقبل فلا ينزل مني أو مذي فلا يفسد صومه وهذا لا خلاف عليه. If nothing came out from that person, as you know, it could be what comes out from the man during arousal is either semen or madhi, right? This clear fluid, and the madhi is, as you know, is the ejaculation fluid, right? So if nothing came out, then his fasting is definitely okay, and that's a consensus between all the people of knowledge. Okay? If many came out, then basically it's clear. His fasting is gone. But عند الجمهور, because some scholars said no, he's still okay. Ibn Hazm, for instance, نعم إلا Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm said that no, his fasting is okay. Because why? He goes literally. He went literally by the hadith, and they are literalist. And of course, Aisha, when she mentioned the hadith, she mentioned that Prophet ﷺ had good self-restraint. If you don't have this kind of self-restraint, you shouldn't. But she said, so let's say that everybody said that this fasting is broken and he has to make up for it. And this person should not actually kiss or do anything like this during his fasting, because he knows himself that he cannot control himself. If only madhi is that fluid that comes with arousal, but no, it's not a full ejaculation, right? Scholars have differed. ذهب مالك وأحمد إلى أنه يفطر. Imagine. Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad said that his fast is broken. يفطر. He has broken his fast with madhi. وحجتهم أن المذي خرج لشهوة فأفسد صومه كالمني. They consider it just like the mani. وخالفهم في ذلك آخرون قال لا يفطر. حجتهم أن المذي خارج لا يوجب الغسل. This is Shafi'i, Imam Abu Hanifa, Ahl al-Zahir. They said no. What did she choose here? She said, if of course many came out, then the fasting is broken. Definitely. But the madhi, she leans towards the opinion of Imam Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, or Ibn Hazm, that the madhi does not affect fasting. I think that's the strongest opinion here. Because we don't have any kind of textual evidence to say that the fasting is not acceptable or is broken or is invalid. And you cannot really compare madhi to many, because madhi easily, even if somebody sees something, you don't even have to touch or kiss. So if somebody sees something, he can have madhi. So that's sometimes even not seeing, even with imagination. So that makes things extremely difficult. Imagine how many days you'll have to make up now. What?
Difficult for people who are not married, like
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Let's take one more thing that's allowed for the fasting person. الحقنة لغير التغذية, to have an injection not for nutrition. Of course, if it's for nutrition, and such as IV fluids, for instance, or parenteral nutrition or something like that, or maybe even vitamin, because that's the form of nutrition, then that is clear that you shouldn't do that. That will break the fast. ذهب أكثر أهل العلم أن الحقنة تفسد الصوم إذا وصل الدواء إلى الجوف. But you have to know, we talked about this briefly yesterday, that actually most scholars of the past, such Hanabila, Malikiya, Hanafiya, Shafi'iyya, all of them said that anything that is injected into the body, intravenous or even per rectum, through the rectum, they all said that it would actually break the fast. وخالفهم في ذلك آخرون. They said, and such as Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Hazm, They said, no, there's no evidence to support that, because if you get an injection that does not give you any kind of nourishment or nutrition, and this is not a normal passage to the stomach anyhow, and you're not going to receive any nourishment from it, there's no point in saying that this would actually cancel your fasting. But the four schools of law, Hanabila, Shafi'iyya, Hanafiya, Maliki, all of them said that anything injected in the body, whether nutritious or not, would actually break your fasting. That's why this confusion arose. Let me read to you what she chose. Let's read what Ibn Taymiyyah said, because what he said makes sense here. He says, وَأَمَّا الْكُحْلُ وَالْحُقْنَةُ وَمَا يُقَطَّرُ فِي إحليله ومداواة المأمومة، يعني الشجة تصل إلى الدماغ، الجائفة الطعنة تبلغ جوف الرأس أو جوف البطن، فهذا مما تنازع فيه أهل العلم، والأظهر أنه لا يفطر بشيء من ذلك، فإن الصيام من دين المسلمين يحتاج إلى معرفته الخاص والعام، فلو كانت هذه الأمور مما حرمها الله ورسوله في الصيام ويفسد الصوم بها، لكان هذا مما يجب على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بيانه، ولو ذكر ذلك لعلمه الصحابة وبلغوه الأمة كما بلغوا سائر شرعه. He says basically these things, such as the kuhl and such as injection, and he even talked about people who have like deep wounds that are being treated, because sometimes you flush those wounds with certain solutions to clean them out and so on, and that goes into the body basically. He says we don't have any evidence or any text even talking about that, and since those things are things that people would think about at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, if he had talked about it, then we would have had any kind of hadith or saying of the Prophet ﷺ mentioning the ruling on this matter. But since there isn't, he says then we have to go back to the original state again, that everything is permissible unless stated otherwise. He says فلم ينقل أحد من أهل العلم عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في ذلك لا حديثا صحيحا ولا ضعيفا ولا مسندا ولا مرسلا علم أنه لم يذكر شيئا في ذلك. And then he said فالصائم نهي عن الأكل والشرب لأن ذلك سبب التقوي فترك الأكل والشرب. Anyhow, he says what we are prohibited to do while we're fasting is basically eating or drinking, and of course sexual intercourse. Those are the things that are prohibited. And she actually chose that same opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Hazm, and this is another example where the stronger opinion is totally outside even the four schools of law. But since this is mentioned in those books, we have to know that there's no evidence to support it, although the vast majority of scholars and their followers have followed this and applied it in their life for ages, but there's nothing to support it really. But of course, if it is for nourishment, then it does break the fast. And she says here, كما قال شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية وما كان ربك نسيا. He says Allah doesn't forget. If something needed to be clarified to the people, Allah would have clarified it. And remember the hadith I mentioned to you before, إن الله حرم أشياء فلا تنتهكوها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited certain things, so do not commit those prohibitions. وحد حدودا فلا تعتدوها. And he set certain limits for you, so do not transgress the limits. وأمر بأشياء فلا تضيعوها. And he commanded you and obligated you to do certain things, do not neglect them. And then he said, Prophet ﷺ, وسكت عن أشياء رحمة بكم غير نسيان فلا تسألوا عنها. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deliberately left certain things alone. He didn't mention anything about them, not that he forgot them. He says من غير نسيان, without forgetting them, of course, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forget. وما كان ربك نسيا. He says فلا تسألوا عنها. Don't even go into these subjects and do not even discuss them. And really, you will find that many things in our life have become difficult because people went into these matters and started going into details that you will find no text from the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba ever mentioning them. And that leads to more and more restrictions in every aspect of your daily life. Inshallah, as we go, we'll find certain things, other things that come up like that. Go ahead.
How about the airdrop?
Eardrop is also okay. Eardrops are fine, and eye drops are fine. Only the nasal drops are not okay. But we mentioned that enemas are okay as well. If you have somebody's constipated, what can he do? He can have an enema no problem. And the injections that are not for nourishment are okay. And next time we'll talk about blood draw and fast bloodletting and so on.
What about using a toothpaste?
That's coming, but using toothpaste is also okay, and using siwak is okay. Yeah, no. Yeah, well, that's okay. That's the enema. It's okay. Enema is okay as well. You know, people have restricted fasting so much. I remember one time going to a masjid when I was younger, maybe 12 or 14 years old, and they had these cups in the front, plastic cups in the front of the masjid, and those cups, basically, people who sat to read Quran between Asr and Maghrib, they would whenever they have too much saliva in their mouth, they go. And have you ever seen something like this? So even the saliva they forbade on us. Seriously, wallah, it's a problem.
The one that you said yesterday about showering.
Yes.
They used to tell us because in our town there is a river.
Yes.
So as kids we used to go to the river and swim. So
Yeah.
during fasting, if we feel heat, we go to the river and swim to cool down.
Yes.
No, you've already caught your
See, here's the problem. And we talked about this yesterday. To cool down your body and even cool down your mouth with cold water, but not to have any drop going in your throat, that's permissible as well. Even we'll see as well, for a woman to taste the food but not, and then she would have to really flush it out so no taste goes in her throat, that's even permissible. It's very easy, but when you follow certain opinions that are not based on evidence, your life becomes more difficult.
I'm actually surprised that people were able to inject themselves in the times of these, school of thoughts, that they came to the opinion that it's not allowed.
Yes, yeah, I don't know how.
Inject themselves, that they didn't have needles.
Yeah, I understand. Maybe they talked about because people maybe had big wounds and they used to clean those wounds on the inside. Maybe that's what they meant by injecting, by pouring water inside the wounds, and that water, of course, goes inside the body. And sometimes even wounds in the stomach. And he talked about wounds in the head and wounds in the stomach. Of course, the person will die, but that's a different story. But still, they used to sometimes use certain fluids which they thought maybe were curing or something. Maybe they put some Zamzam water or something. You never know what they did. Astaghfirullah, inshallah.